afternoon, dear participants. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today in ERM webinar on just transition to a low carbon economy. Before we start, please allow me to introduce myself and also introducing the guest speakers that we have today. So my name is Naritalia Panjaitan. I'm a senior consultant at ERM and I'm the corporate sustainability and climate change lead here in Indonesia. Perhaps before we go to the speakers, I would like to introduce ERM. So ERM, Environmental Resource Management, known as ERM, is the world's global pure play of sustainability consultant. We work with environmental, health and safety and sustainability services with around 7,000 world-class experts in 170 offices across 39 countries. ERM Indonesia was established in 1998 and we offer a full range of services from boardroom to booths. So that's about ERM. And today I will be joined with a few of my colleagues. First of all, Pak Setiaji Hadi Prayitno. So Pak Setiaji, if you would like to come to turn on your camera. Hello, Pak. Good afternoon. Pak Setiaji is the country managing partner of Indonesia. Pak Aji had obtained master degree in the project management from Faculty of Built and Environment, Queensland University, Brisbane, Australia. And Pak Aji is a versatile and commercially astute hands-on senior manager with a blend of strategic, corporate, project, and experience across mining, mineral, oil and gas, infrastructures, and property sectors. He has over 30 years experience in many facets of project development and implementation, project management, and also business strategic. He is thus a professional who can combine technical expertise, strong interpersonal skill, and also professional approach, strategic approach, and business acumen and integrity to achieve strategic direction of a company. Welcome, Pak Aji. Happy that you are here with us.
Thank you, Narita. Can you hear me?
Yes. Next, we have also our expert, our internal expert, Ms. Rutuja Tendolkar, is a partner of Asia Pacific ERM. Rutuja is a primarily engaged in capital project delivery across resettlement, advisory, human rights, and impact assessment, as well as also transaction advisory, ESG, and sustainable finance in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and also Africa. Rutuja has engaged in the planning and implementation of major capital projects that entails physical and economic displacement, impact on community resources and ecosystem services, and specific livelihood impacts. She has interpreted IFC, AIIB, World Bank, ADB, GBIC, EBRD, and a lot of other things in terms of environmental and social safeguards, requirements, in major capital projects. So Rutuja is here as our expert in just transition. Rutuja, if you are already online, we welcome you and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Narita, and selamat sore, everyone.
Nice, thank you very much, Rutuja. And next we have our speaker, external speaker, Bapak Binahidra Logiardi, or also known as Pak Beni. Pak Beni is the VP, Head of Corporate Responsibility of MindID. So Pak Beni is a senior lead in the area of sustainability, corporate responsibility, and social performance with different sectors as municipalities, consumer goods, forestry, pulp and paper, as well as mining and metals industry. He has board experience stretched from the environmental and social due diligence up till sustainability strategy development, program management, impact assessment, and monitoring, including ESG disclosure. And now, Pak Beni is the head of corporate sustainability of MindID, a state-owned enterprise in Indonesia that has subsidiaries in various mining sector, mining and mineral sector. We welcome you, Pak Beni. Very happy that you can join us here today.
Thank you, Narita. Selamat sore semua.
Selamat sore, Pak. And next we have Pak Teguh Rengga Velamona, or we call him Pak Rengga. Pak Rengga is the Business Development Project EPCM Head of Adaro Power. Pak Rengga is a seasoned business development, commercial, and project management professional with over 18 years of experience as executive consultant, project management, and procurement roles in various energy-related projects in Indonesia, as well as abroad in Middle East, South Korea, and other Southeast Asian countries. His core competence is on the nexus on the appropriate technology adoption, and then transformative private sector investment in thermal, renewable energy, low carbon project development. Currently, Pak Rengga is leading and driving the business development activities of Adaro Power. And in addition to his day-to-day job as the head of business development, he is also involved in formulating the strategic transformation of Adaro towards the creation of several new engines that will allow Adaro to support low carbon economy transition in Indonesia. Welcome, Pak Rengga.
Thank you, Rita, for the introduction. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, and then the last but not the least, we welcome Ibu Mutia Cherani, or we call her Ibu Rani. Ibu Rani is currently working for Asian Development Bank, ADB, focusing on energy transition mechanism country platform in Indonesia. So the news that we heard about ETM that was launched in G20, that was also the work of Ibu Rani, so very happy to have her here. Prior to ADB, she has worked for Jurong Town Corporation, Holcim Millennium Challenge Corporation, and Worldwide Fund for Nature International. She is a seasoned sustainable development professional and experienced with international development agencies, private sector, research-based institution in Southeast Asia, and also she's also a passionate philanthropist in the field of Indonesian performing arts. She studied in Parahyangan University and then National University of Singapore. Welcome, Bu Rani. Very nice to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Ibu Narita. Nice meeting everyone here.
All right. So next, a little bit of agenda that we have. Moving on, perhaps we can have the slide of agenda. Oh, before we move on to the agenda, we have a little bit of house rules. So first of all, we encourage active participation. In your screen, there is a Q&A chat box, chat function, which you can type your question here anytime. And at the later stage, we will have a Q&A session. Secondly, this webinar will be recorded and will be published on ERM APEC YouTube channel. So we ask your permission for that, for the recording of the webinar. Thirdly, we have enabled the English transcript feature, so you can click live transcript and then you can see the subtitle underneath the screen. And at last, if you have any additional questions, thoughts, etc., we encourage you to share your feedback about the webinar right after the webinar, because we will send you a short survey. Other than that, please feel free to reach out to me and to other ERM staffs if you want to have further conversation about this topic. Other than that, so all of the speakers here are Indonesia and fluent in Bahasa, except for Rutuja, but don't worry. So feel free to also write questions in Bahasa if you want to, and I will be the one translating the questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, agenda for today will be, the first will be opening remarks by Pak Aji, Indonesia Country Managing Partner. And then we will have a pick on insights for a just transition by Rutuja. And then we will have a panel discussion in which Pak Rengga, Pak Beni, and Ibu Rani, and also Rutuja will discuss together about just transition, the challenges and the opportunities at country level and also at company level. And then we will end that with Q&A session. So participants are invited to write their question in the Q&A chat box, in which we will then get from the chat box and we will post the question to the speakers. Now, without further ado, we can start. So I will give the microphone and the camera to Pak Aji for the opening remarks. Please, Pak Aji.
Yeah, thank you, Narita. You have taken away all my introductory speech, right? So I have nothing to say, but just a few things I would like to share. Number one, the ERM is really glad and really delighted to be able to help these functions. Thank you for the panelists for your willingness to fulfill our invitations, and thank you also for the participant for being able to allocate your precious time to join this webinar. And the second one is, we all know that this LCET or low carbon emission transition, right, is becoming more and more important to our business. So let's hear from the panelists what is their insight and what is their opinion, and then hopefully we can have some takeaways for us to be able to help us in navigate our business throughout this very difficult pressure, such low carbon economy and energy transitions, which is now is becoming more and more trends or more and more mandatory for our business. So again, let's hear the experts saying, and then hopefully we can get some takeaways that can be used for our business. Thank you, Narita. Thank you, Narita. Please, the floor is yours.
Right. Thank you very much, Pak Aji, for the opening remarks. All right, so without further ado, let's go to the topic that we've been looking forward to discuss today. Around, first of all, the transition towards a low carbon economy, which we have to do in a right manner. So just transition to a low carbon economy. I will give the floor to Rutuja. Rutuja, for your presentation.
Thanks a lot, Narita, and Paaji, thank you so much for this opportunity. So once again, Narita gave a very long introduction about me, but essentially I'm a partner, humble partner in ERM Social Performance and Human Rights team, and very happy to be discussing this very important topic with you. So in the first part of the webinar, we will be taking you through an overview of the concept of just transition along with some context. That is, what is the evolving framework on understanding just transition? What does it mean to tackle inequality, and what do businesses need to consider to approach net zero in a way that is equitable and fair? On your screen right now, we presented 3 examples. The first example is around the whole conversation on livelihood implications when we are phasing out fossil fuels. That is, recognizing the need to ensure that the lives and livelihoods of workers and communities are considered as we move away from fossil fuels and pivot towards a net zero economy. The second example is slightly far away from where I am in India, in Australia, which is the Hazelwood project, which has found workers and communities at a crossroad linked to the entire conversation around retiring that particular project. And the third example is back home from India, where ultra mega solar projects, while these are central to achieving our renewable energy targets, they have consistently raised concerns about their land requirements and on impinging upon the rights of certain indigenous communities. Now, these 3 examples on your screen have 3 dimensions in common. First is energy security, second is energy equity, and the third is sustainability. And these 3 concepts is what we call as the energy trilemma, and which has evolved into a broader concept of just transition. Now, moving on, let's focus on the just transition concept a little further. Yumun, if you could please move your slide. So energy policy across governments is reorienting to balance these 3 dimensions that we presented with the examples, that is energy security, energy equity, and sustainability. So what this has meant is a fundamental rethink about how we must transition our power generation sources and ultimately our economy in a way that tackles existing inequality and does not add additional impacts or injustices. So the thinking around this trilemma has led to the concept of a just transition. Now, I'm very mindful that just transition is not a very articulately defined term as yet. Now, there may be some advantage in this ambiguity, certainly for us consultants when we try and interpret this for our clients, but the blurriness can also sometimes impede action. So while the definition is evolving, there are certain underlying principles and considerations that are becoming important to consider on embedding or enabling a just transition. For example, human rights-based, fairness, equality, and inclusivity, decent and high value work, the whole concept of green jobs, ecological and social well-being, and multi-stakeholder collaboration. And we're going to touch a little bit on all of these in the presentation and the panel discussion that follows. Now, while some of these topics or principles that I mentioned, you would have heard from social risk management processes or our conventional ESG safeguards, the nuance here is on how we piece these together for a project or a client or a sector and approach it from the lens or the perspective of a just transition. So therefore, as you see on your screen, a just transition is as much an outcome, that is a fairer and climate resilient future for all, but also a process that must be undertaken in collaboration with those impacted by the transition to net zero. And essentially, these impacts are threefold. Who gets adversely impacted when we move away from fossil fuels? Who gets both adversely and positively impacted when we move towards low carbon energy sources, whether it's renewable energy or even EVs or others? And third, the broader vulnerability impacts of people and communities that are currently dealing with or adapting to the effects of climate change. So moving on to framework. Now, as we move from ambiguity to ambition and to action, the discussion on the need for a just transition framework was driven by organizations such as the ILO after the Paris Agreement in 2015, with a focus on the labor market and the concern linked to jobs. I understand in Indonesia, the Bappenas has said that there would be 4.4 million new jobs created to deliver Indonesia's renewable energy ambitions. So that's the scale that we're talking about. So since the Paris Agreement in 2015 and ILO's sort of directives on green transition or a just transition, successive conference of parties and other entities have broadened the conversation on what just transition should involve beyond just the workers to concepts around gender, vulnerability of communities, and the socioeconomic impacts of the transition. And all of these culminated into the parties agreeing to a landmark milestone at COP27 with the creation of a loss and damage fund, which I'm sure all of us have read about and tried to understand. So essentially, the loss and damage fund is a funding arrangement to channel funding towards countries or communities that are currently suffering from the impacts of climate change. Now, the rules and the process and the mechanism is still getting worked out. There is a transitional committee that has been formed after COP27, and this is going to continue to take shape as we move into COP28 this year. But what is clear is that a lot of the framing on what just transition means in practice requires international community and government action. However, that does not mean that businesses who are actually driving the transition by being boots on the ground and by injecting capital into the system need to wait. There is a lot to navigate in the meanwhile, specifically inequality. So if we can move on to the next slide. One of these key challenges that we have to tackle as a private sector and a community of like-minded thinkers is around tackling inequality. We're talking about inequality today, despite the fact that the world economy has grown exponentially over the past 200 years. And as a result of this, the prevalence of extreme poverty, it has dropped dramatically. Measures of well-being have improved. Nevertheless, our current distribution of income and wealth, specifically in emerging economies like Indonesia and India, leave a lot to be desired. So last year, a World Business Council for Sustainable Development report stated that today, the world's 10 richest men own more wealth than the bottom 3 billion people globally. So just consider what that means. And that systemic risk that this represents, and considering how prevalent inequality is, mega trends are actually making the situation worse. Climate change, technological disruption, the COVID-19 pandemic, they are all hitting the most vulnerable the hardest. And this is represented in the graph on your screen, along with certain consequences of inequality that you may read at your leisure. But basically, the brass tacks is that corporate action and investment into just transition needs to serve to reduce inequality and not just brush it under the carpet. So moving on, in terms of other drivers, now, When we talk about corporate just transition actions, all of us, including ERM and some of our clients and companies, they need to consider and frame a business case around what just transition means beyond just tackling inequality. We've given a few examples on your screen. The first one is evolving regulation. So there are several pieces of regulation that are either coming or that are being written or being thought about, where companies will need to embed or incorporate just transition into the way in which they're approaching net zero or climate action. The second driver is around rating and ESG benchmarking. Increasingly, companies will be assessed against their just transition actions and what it means for the rubber to really hit the road. So some examples are around the Climate and Energy Benchmark, the Climate Action 100 Plus, and the World Bank Benchmarking Alliance. The other key driver, which I'm sure a lot of us will be familiar with, is around access to finance. Green finance will be increasingly tagged to projects that are embedding and actually implementing just transition principles. And in addition to all these drivers are certain business opportunities which are much more local to businesses in Indonesia. So in particular, during the B20 summit that happened last year in Bali, there was a lot of discussion on delivering a renewable energy potential of 418 gigawatts. That's huge. Second is how Indonesia can play a very, very crucial role to enable a sustainable supply of transition minerals such as nickel and bauxite, which are really, really important for batteries, EVs, and that entire value chain. And finally, retiring coal power, which is currently planned to be around 5.5 gigawatts. So all of these are business opportunities that must be considered as a part of your business case while thinking about just transition. Continuing with Indonesia and looking at the momentum that currently is there, I don't want to get ahead into what the panelists will be discussing. However, corporate action will, of course, have to consider certain realities that are prevalent. For example, 61% of Indonesia's energy today is driven by coal power plants. I may be slightly out of date on statistics, so feel free to correct me. And second is that Indonesia, being a major coal exporter, coal mines are extremely important to communities around South Sumatra, East, South, and Central Kalimantan. However, we do see that momentum is building with initiatives such as the Just Transition Energy Partnerships. So this is a $20 billion opportunity for Indonesia, which is going to be spent in the next 3 to 5 years, which is aimed at restoring mines, modernizing coal assets, and bringing efficiency in power generation and distribution. This will, of course, be funded by the International Partners Group, as well as commercial banks that are part of the GFANZ, or the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. So in view of all these opportunities, here are a few actions that corporates in Indonesia can consider to enable a just transition. First of all, reviewing your context, understanding stakeholder priorities and perspectives which are very, very unique to you and your business case. For example, do you need to expand your renewable energy portfolio? Do you need to close facilities? Do you need to move your supply chain? What you can do around just transition is extremely contextual to this unique case. Second is around embedding just transition into policies, your net zero action plans, strategies, and empowering people, your employees, your contractors, and your suppliers to take that into account in whatever they're doing. Third is around tailoring strategy, which is not applying a one-fits-all approach, but really understanding your context, what your stakeholders want, and what good would mean in practice. And finally, supporting best practice and sharing them. Now, while all of these concepts sound very, very simple, social issues usually are very complex. And so the nuance here is to really collaborate radically. And this is the term based on which I'm going to end my presentation. So the idea of radical collaboration resonated across voices in COP27 and beyond. We've all seen videos, LinkedIn media posts, etc. And radical collaboration is this term which is to seek new partnerships, new ways of working across stakeholders and being transparent. So we need to live in questions on how is this going to reduce inequality? Can we replicate initiatives at scale by sharing them widely and by collaborating? And finally, how are we showing up as leaders to empower and challenge each other? So with that, I hope to learn more on embedding a just transition in the Indonesia context from our panelists. So over to you, Narita.
Thank you very much, Rutusha, for the insights. It is a very valuable insights, and I believe the participants right now probably will already have questions, which can be written in the chat, post in the chat, which we can talk about it later at the end of this session. All right, so we will go to the panel discussion around just transition, and we will have Pak Rengga, Pak Beni, and Ibu Rani to discuss about just transition, Indonesia, and the companies transition towards low carbon economy. How can they support Indonesia's transitions, and what does just transition mean for their companies? I will invite the first speaker, Pak Beni, to start with the presentation.
Thank you, Narita. So I think what has been explained previously is quite challenging on how to implement just transition around us. So for us in mining industry Indonesia, a holding company for the state-owned enterprises in mining and metals that was established in 2017 is really important, and this is because as a state-owned mining companies, we have I would say a function that given by the government to be a value creation actor and also agent of the development. So first slide, I would like to discuss on the, I think we can move on the first slide. So as I mentioned previously, that the mining industry in Indonesia, or Mine ID, was established around 5-6 years ago with a given mandate by from the shareholder, the government of Indonesia, to be a world-class company, where to achieve that, we need to control the strategic reserve mineral resources in Indonesia, and also to be active in the downstream activities. And with that, we can be a market leader. And for us, the sustainability is a part of the game. Without that sustainability, we cannot actually articulate the mandate that given by the shareholder. The next slide. This is a commodities that we manage in mining industry in Indonesia, where we actually consist of the mining and metal company in Indonesia, Aneka Tambang, Bukit Asam, Timah, Freeport Indonesia, as well as the Inalum. The commodities that we produce is actually is really what is required for the development and also for the transition itself. We manage bauxite, coal, nickel, gold, copper, aluminum, and tins. And I think we are aware that the mining and metals commodities is really important for those transition that actually we discussed today. Next slide. This is how Mine ID approach the futures of the companies, where we want to achieve our vision to be a leading global integrated resources company, where at the same time we can provide values to the society and the environment. And our sustainability pathway actually consists on 6 pillars, where we focus on the issues of the environment and climate change, smart operation and the product stewardship itself, the people, society, the economic development, and also the governance itself. And those pathways actually developed by adoption of ISO 26000 as a guiding principle. The 10 mining principle with 39 performance expectation as a performance standard, and the GRI and sustainable development goal, where we can measure our impact as a disclosure structure. And of course, the foundation of all is to comply with the regulations that are related to the business. And we also define our ESG principle, where we then focus on how to develop a business case on each of the activities and manage the impact, and also monitor the risk. And we have 27 ESG principles that describe and explain the 6 pillars of the sustainability. Next slide. Actually, I would like to emphasize on one of the pillars, one of the strategy that we developed to address the environment and climate change, where as part of this state-owned enterprise initiative that was direct and led by the Ministry of State-owned Enterprises to also focus on how we can reduce the emission as part of the contribution of the state-owned enterprises. We commit to reduce our emission by 60% of 2030 business as usual emission. And of course, along with the other government sectors, we would like to commit also by 2016 to achieve the net zero emission. And how to achieve those emissions, actually, we have a 3 pillar of strategy. First of all is to prevent, where we want to actually use the low carbon power and the fuels. The second one is how to reduce the emission itself. Therefore, we need to improve our energy use efficiency, and to mitigate if there is any residual emission of those operation and the business. And we also projected that in 2030, our emission would be 8.7 million tons CO2 equivalent, and will grow to 9.1 million tons CO2 equivalent. And we have also a roadmap to reduce by 60% in 2030, 45% in 2040, and net zero by 2060.
Hi, hello everyone. Can you hear my voice clearly, Narita? Hello?
Yes, we can, Pak.
All right, perhaps we get to the slide directly. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share with all the panelists today and all the listeners out there. So just a little bit of overview about Adaro Power. I'm working for Adaro Power as a head of business development. Adaro Power is one of the largest IPPs in Indonesia. Right now, we have more than 2 gigawatt power plants, mostly coal, and there are a small portion of solar PV. We are a part of Adaro Energy Indonesia Group, which has a very strong financial performance last year. Yeah. So this is a little bit of overview on assets that we have. Although mostly is coal, we are keen to go into the renewable energy sector. Please go to the next slide. Yeah, so as part of our effort to quote unquote go green and to participate in just energy transition, we are actually creating 2 new pillars in the anticipation of the new green economy, right? So Rotuja explained a little bit about the critical minerals that we need. So we are actually building a Adaro Minerals, basically to help building all the required minerals for the green economy, right? We also, in addition to our thermal business, which have a very good performance, also build Adaro Green, which there are two objectives. Number one is to support our newest established pillars in Kaltara Industrial Park, 16,500 hectare industrial estate. And we are currently developing large-scale hydropower plants there, as well as other REs, yes, solar PV, biomass, what have you. Outside of the Kaltara Industrial Parks, we are also developing various new renewable energy projects from wind farm, floating solar PV, and waste energy. Go to the next slide. So, in addition to what we've done in our two new pillars or two new engines for the new green economy, in our existing engine, which is Adaro Energy, which based on thermal power businesses, we are currently doing some decarbonization efforts, right? For example, we are supplying electricity to our mining area. So instead of using diesel, they are using electricity from our existing power plants. We are developing co-firing initiative to our coal-firing power plant, substituting some of them with biomass, right? We also involve the communities to utilize domestic waste and wood chip as part of the pellets for the biomass. We are also developing nature-based solution for management, and we plan to generate average carbon credit claim of 900K TCO2 per annum for the next 10 years. And we are currently doing and studying on how we can utilize carbon capture and storage as well as hydrogen, because that's the future of the power sector in Indonesia and around the world. Next slide. Yeah, Ratuja explained earlier about the importance of involving communities on just energy transition. And that's one part of what we are doing, although it's not a very big scale right now, but we are very keen to help communities around the area and get them involved as much as we can. Right? And one of the initiatives that we did is on-site waste processing technology. So basically, we want to convert organic waste to pellet, and then we can utilize them for co-firing in our existing power plants, so to reduce consumption of coal a little bit and using pellet as the source. So this is efforts that we are continuously doing in some of our coal-fired steam power plants. Next slide. Again, part of decarbonization effort in our mining area, because most of our mining area is in the remote location, we want to reduce the consumption of fuel because sometimes there are no electricity connected in the area. So what we did is we installed solar PV, floating solar PV, and we always joke that we actually have the biggest floating solar PV in Indonesia right now, until of course Cirata is online, right? But we are very, very keen on doing this. And it's proven, actually, we already have some positive environmental impact on this. We're replacing 30K liters of diesel per year and try to avoid emission of 98 tons CO2 per year. So although it's small, but I think it is the right direction for us. Next slide, please. This is example that we also working together with our international partner, Total Eren, to deliver 70 megawatt wind turbine power plant in our own backyard in South Kalimantan. So we have a large mining area in South Kalimantan, but we're also doing renewable energy there. We signed the LOI with PLN on the G20 event, and we are very excited about this project. And hopefully we can close out the PPA very soon. Next slide. So as I mentioned previously, that we are very keen on renewable energy as well as Adaro Green. And what I show here is all my pipeline. So if you can see here, all of my pipelines actually revolve around renewable energy. So we are developing wind turbine, like I mentioned earlier. We are developing mini hydro power plant in one of our mining area, again, to be active in the decarbonization effort. The intention is also to reduce fuel consumption in that area. We are developing various solar PV projects, as well as waste to energy. We are actually one of the 2 consortium who passed the PQ stage of the waste to energy project in Labuan Nangka. Next. So this is a little bit about just energy transition. In our view, just energy transition is a future-oriented concept. Well, actually now it's present-oriented concept, not only future, right? And it's based on the principle of sustainability and climate justice, and the benefit should be equally distributed, not only with the developers, suppliers, financiers, but also the society as general. I also want to add that in my research, in our research, there are 6 key success factors on just energy transition implementation that I think will play a crucial role in reducing GHG emission, improving energy security, and ensuring fair and equitable distribution of benefit and costs. Number 1, I think we need to have a strong political commitment, because we need to have a favorable policies and continuity of regulation. It's not only the regulation itself, but the continuity of regulation. Because for investors, lenders, what they want is a confidence that the regulation is clear and continue to support the development of just energy transition. By doing that, we will attract capital, right, for renewable energy development in Indonesia. Number 2, I touched this a little bit about financing investment. We need a financing investment on both public and private investment. But besides that, we also need access to financing for individual and communities, because we believe that to develop the renewable energy and just energy transition is not only the job of a big private sectors, but large conglomerates, but also the people, small businesses, and what have you. And it is supported by the fact that renewable energy costs are actually plummeting, because there are a lot of money going in, right? Flow of investment, tech advancement, obviously, scale, and improve lesson learned in the past 5 to 10 years. So I think we are in a very good spot right now to do this. The third one, energy integration, because Ratuja touched this a little bit earlier, that Indonesia is an archipelago country. So it's a challenge for us on grid integration, right? But I think grid integration is very critical to ensure RE sources are connected to the grid and have access to the same infrastructure or services as the traditional energy sources. And transition actually disrupted the traditional utilities and oil and gas sector value chain. And separate value chain industries now converging with significant competitive overlap, actually. For example, nowadays, perhaps not so much in Indonesia, but in the US and Europe, utilities companies are actually now competing with traditional oil and gas companies to fuel vehicle, right? So there is a EV versus combustion debate right now, right? Versus gas station versus EV charging, for example. And even oil and gas companies nowadays are moving on from hydrocarbon to low carbon sources. And they have invested a lot in solar, wind, and biofuel. The fourth point is we need to utilize Indonesia's abundant human resources and communities involvement. Because when we talk about energy transition, it's not only the energy that will be impacted, but also the people, right? So there will be new skill sets required to cater myriad aspect of RE development, from financing, design, costs, O&M, and we need to make sure that our expert, our people take significant roles on this, because we don't want to be left behind in our own backyard. So I think this is a key point that we need to address. The other point on this one is we need to take care of communities, especially where RE projects are going on, because we need to make sure that the benefits of renewable energy projects are shared fairly, not only for certain group or certain people. The fifth part is technology transfer and capacity building. Of course, the technology perhaps now doesn't come directly from Indonesia, but we need to make sure that we can transfer those technology to the development of local capacity, because those are very important in the success of implementation, right? So, for example, training education program, as well as collaboration with international partners. And last but not least, I think we need to make sure our monitoring and evaluation done very well. Need to track progress of RE project as well as monitoring their impact, not only in the financial part, but also the community's environment. I think those are the points that I think are very critical for the success of just energy transition. Thank you, everyone. That's all for my presentation.
Thank you very much, Pak Rengga. So now that we have heard the views of companies from Pak Rengga and Pak Beni, we would like to invite Ibu Rani to listen to her views, to the view from Development Bank. Ibu Rani, we invite you for the presentation.
Thank you, Narita, and thank you, ERM, for inviting ADB to join this very distinguished panel. Can I have my first slide, please? Or maybe we go straight to the second one. A little bit delayed in the next slide, please. Yep. So just bringing you the summary, sorry, previously, slide number 2. Thank you. So yeah, I'll go through 3 areas in this conversation today, largely. So I'll start by making a case for coal-fired power plant early retirement and why ADB is really focusing on that area for now. And then I'll discuss also the approach and the components of ADB energy transition mechanism. And then the third part is when we're gonna discuss in a little bit more details on energy transition mechanism elements. And in this executive summary that you see on the screen, actually, we really want to make a case that coal-fired power plant is the largest source of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. And especially if we are zooming into Southeast Asia, the coal-fired power plant encompasses more than 50% of power generation capacity. In Indonesia, it's actually more than 60%. And those are actually quite young power plants, which really pose a challenge to be retired earlier than its lifespan. And Pak Rengga already mentioned that the renewable energy cost is actually declining in many parts of the world. But in much of developing country, the coal-fired plant generated electricity are tied with the long-term power offtake agreement, which requires some sort of intervention to avoid stranded asset. And therefore, that is what ADB ETM tried to achieve as a replicable and scalable market-based model to accelerate the transition from coal to clean energy. Just by way, very briefly, on the progress that we have made, we are currently doing technical and financial feasibility works in the pilot countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And from really based on those 3 countries, retiring even 50% of its capacity, it can significantly reduce the CO2 emissions by approximately 200 million tons per year. And yeah, this one we will also unlock investments in other areas that also discussed by the other speakers: renewable, storage, electric vehicle, and other clean technologies. And ADB here is, our role is really fourfold. First is to crowd in partnership through public and private sector. And we also support the just transition to the affected communities. And as Climate Bank, we will ensure the climate credentials and enable harnessing of the carbon offsets. So if we can move to the next slide. So In 2021, so not too long ago, ADB launched the Southeast Asia Energy Transition Mechanism Partnership in COP26, so about 2 years ago. And at that time, we were joined by Indonesia and Philippines as key partner to launch the pilot study. And back then also, Japan Ministry of Finance announced seed financing for the Energy Transition Mechanism Partnership Trust Fund. And even until now, we garner strong interest also from various countries. And in COP27, German government actually add to that financing. And ever since Glasgow, we have seen strong ownership from the two countries so far. Indonesia especially exemplified country leadership by adopting energy transition as the key priority for the G20, establish the Indonesia ETM country platform, and with very strong support and backing from various international organizations. And meanwhile, in the Philippines also, while its electricity market is more liberalized, they have also have successfully launched a pilot on the private sector side that managed to halve the operating life of one coal power plant for 50% in partnership with various private sector partners, financial and as well as other partners. So yes, so the future is bright in Southeast Asia, and we would really love to support that. Next slide, please. So I'll start by describing, why are we looking at coal-fired power plant? Again, emphasizing it as a largest source of anthropogenic greenhouse gas emission. And if you see the left side of the presentation, the share of coal-fired power generation actually dropped in Europe and US. But if you see the dashed line there, it's the global share for coal-fired power, and it is actually flat. And where does it come from? It remains very high in Asia. The fleet of coal power plant remains quite high. And again, as I explained earlier, the fleet are also quite young. It is locked into a long-term PPA, and therefore a solution to rapidly decarbonize this is really necessary. And that's what ETM is trying to do. So next slide, please. So this is really to illustrate why speeding up the retirement of coal power plant is important. If you compare the business as usual case on the left side and with energy transition mechanism on the right side. So as you see, developing Asia has a growing demand in electricity. And if you see the orange line here, that simulates the lifetime of coal-fired generation, which basically reduce the space for renewables to come in. So the urgency here is by having a mechanism, a favorable mechanism to early retire the existing coal-fired power plant, the benefit will come threefold. First, the emission will be reduced, demand for clean energy investment will increase significantly, and overall generation cost in the long run will be lowered as well. And of course, this power plant through energy transition mechanism, will be embarking into an orderly transition pathway for the coal generator, instead of abruptly stopping the power plant, which may pose other problem pertaining to even system or technical element for provision of electricity, but also the just transition aspect, meaning the whole economy that revolves around the coal power plant needs to be approached very, very deliberately to ensure that the impacted communities and the surrounding value chain are carefully addressed. Next slide, please. So when ADB approach energy transition mechanism, it holistically look at 4P element, as you can see in the screen here. So we are not really only focusing on transactions. First, we are considering the people element, in which the underlying foundation of supporting just transaction, protecting the livelihood while maintaining the affordability of power provision. And in here, ADB comes in with technical assistance to assess the just transition and the options of available financing, and as well as environmental and social safeguard, which is the cornerstone of ADB operations. And then if you look at the second box on policy, we also support the government to create the enabling environment to create policies and regulation to accelerate the energy transition from coal to clean energy through policy program relates to climate change in the national level, as well as energy specific sector reform programs. So we do support the government on that aspect. And then the third box is looking again on the power sector, right? So ADB here is really looking at the power sector decarbonization in order to promote a scalable market-based model by early retiring the coal and also options for repurposing, but not forgetting also investment in clean energy storage or grid enhancement, which is very, very important in archipelagic countries such as Indonesia. And of course, all those three are built upon a foundation of partnership, because we cannot do this alone. This transition is a partnership with all stakeholders, private sector, public sector, the government, NGO, civil societies, organization, and philanthropies. Next slide, please. And this slide is a little bit full, and I know my time is running out, but ETM is a rather complex matter to explain. But this is how we envisage the energy transition program to work, and the component there is. So if we see the diagram here, the left box there is where the highly concessional funding will serve as a catalyst. So it will be aggregated coming from grant and other highly concessional resources. It will be pooled with the ADB ETM Partnership Trust Fund. From there, it will be channeled through the central part of this slide here, which really aims to scale up the energy transition mechanism projects with other partners, investors, lenders, and the concessional finance, which will flow through the first two boxes there, will be channeled into the two key parts of the vehicle. The first part is the carbon reduction facility, which will aim to retire coal early. And then the second part is the clean energy facility, which will focus on accelerating the renewable energy. And these two needs to come hand in hand, right? So when you retire the coal, the clean energy will need to come in immediately to replace. So in essence, then you will have an orderly transition which will not disrupt the overall power system of the country. So that can be channeled through an ETM vehicle, which will crowd in investment from various sources. And on top of that, if you see the bottom blue box, then we are also giving the technical assistance, which will enhance the due diligence and the feasibility of those transactions. We conduct analysis on grid, including the technical analysis, just transition assessments to see really the affected communities as well as fiscal impact to the government. We provide support in terms of policy and regulations, and also we're looking at carbon finance as as a means to further enhance this type of transaction in order to attract even more investment. And of course, that has to be accompanied with a proper measurement, reporting, and verification. And if you can see that third box on the right there, will focus on the type of transactions and the scopes of transaction that may look at coal retirement, clean energy, as well as corporate level transaction. The next slide, please. I'm conscious of time, so I'll try to wrap up in the next 3 minutes. Sorry, Narita. I'll try to go through very quickly, but this is how ADB conduct feasibility study. Essentially, first, we are looking at the technical aspect in looking on the project and assets that is selected for retirement. We have to look at the grid stability, the utilization, and the plant age. And then after that, we also conducting the financial due diligence and structuring analysis to understand financial feasibility of that transaction. And then we are structuring the vehicle for that transaction while considering the environmental, social, and governance through a thorough impact assessment that is currently being conducted at strategic level. Next slide. So the next slide should be coming, hopefully. Yeah, just very briefly, the 3 types of the transaction models that can be considered in accelerating the retirement of the coal-fired power plants. The first one is acquisition model, in which the ETM vehicle acquires the share. But the synthetic model is really more interesting and more wholesome, because it will keep the existing shareholder engaged with the plant, provide them a refinancing option at a lower cost, and set out an agreement with the shareholder to retire the plant. So then the economic of the project itself does not change, but the lower cost of financing allow them to shorten the operating life and then reinvest really in renewable energy, which is a simpler approach, which ensure also the owner take part of the transition story. And the third is on the portfolio model, is when we are looking at a corporate level, where they have a number of portfolio of utilities, which they would look forward to balance their portfolio and shift it into a cleaner element, in which sustainability linked indicator may be used to incentivize the transition. So the next slide, which should be my last one, which will look at the just transition under the energy transition mechanism. And it is really looking at the just transition on the wider scope beyond just the transactions itself, right? Because if we're talking about just transition, it goes even at the regional scale all the way to the asset level, right? And just transition with ADB and social environmental safeguard at its cornerstone, already starting to conduct a strategic environmental and social impact assessment at the national level, which will provide a framework for transactions, as well as how the government move forward to further incentivize the ETM while considering the just transition elements, preserving the environment, and maximizing the benefit to the community. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Ibu Rani. And it's okay to take a little bit of extra time, because the extra time that you took, I'm pretty sure is very valuable for us. Really a lot of insights. Okay, so now we will move on to the next agenda, which is probably the most exciting part of this webinar for the participants, because we will have discussions with the speakers, and actually we will also discuss the questions that are already posted in the Q&A chat box. So I would like to invite Pak Rengga, Pak Beni, Ibu Rani, and also Rutuja and Pak Aji, if possible, to turn on the camera. So then we can start our live discussions. Okay, thank you very much. Right. So the first question, we start from the beginning. So there is a question posted here. Mainly for Rutuja, but the other speakers, if you would like to also jump in and add the answer, feel free to do so. So we have established that climate change needs to be addressed with drastic actions, and we know that just transition approach needs careful and sometimes timely engagement to all parties affected and potentially affected. How do we make sure that just transition won't impede climate action? So what is the balance here? How do we take care of the balance?
Sure. Thanks, Rania, for your question. I think the framework that ADB provided definitely is something that is very credible and that you can consider. But if I can just step back a little bit, I think this is not an either or scenario. So it's not either climate action or just transition. It is taking people along and leaving no one behind. So how, for example, if we are developing a new renewable energy project in an area where there are indigenous communities, how do we take them along? They may not automatically have the skills to be able to benefit from the jobs that the project brings. Similarly, when we're retiring coal assets, how are we sort of equipping and skilling the workers to potentially do something else, or making the communities less dependent on the economy that the coal power plant and its facilities were providing. So I think ADB's framework and the use of environmental and social safeguards overall is a very good sort of framework that we currently have, while the understanding on just transition evolves, because it still means a lot of different things to a lot of people, and different stakeholders are trying to make sense of that in specific contexts.
Thank you very much, Rutuja. It's a very interesting way of seeing this. So it's not either and or, very interesting, but actually it comes with a package where development needs to come hand in hand towards green energy, but also not leaving others behind. Barani, if I could ask your opinion on this and how ETM would be able to perhaps accommodate this hand-in-hand development.
Yeah, I think first I agree with Rutuja. This is not a zero-sum game. This is everyone on the same boat working together. It is something very new also, energy transition mechanism. So ADB is working also on a framework for just transition, as well as assessing the impact strategically, because there will be positive as well as negative impact from this transition, which everyone needs to consciously consider. And the important thing is also that each actor shouldn't look at themselves in isolation, but everyone is a component that works with the other. So, of course, when we conduct all this assessment that impact the community, that impact the companies, then we should also bring the government in, and of course, through a transparent and consultative process, there will be a pathway for the government to also do the necessary changes, which may not be as fast, right? But it is necessary to have that dialogue transparently, and of course, it's in everyone's interest to make sure the process is really inclusive.
Okay, thank you very much, Burani, for the explanation. And also, fortunately, today in the panel, we have a representative from the private sectors, the companies, Parenga and Pak Beni. So, Parenga, Pak Beni, following up to the question, what do you think, Pak? Can this happen that actually we are transitioning to the green energy, low carbon economy, and at the same time we don't leave we leave no one behind, and actually start creating value, not only for the stakeholder inside the company, but also for the ones outside the company. Pak Rengga or Pak Beni, would you like to start?
Mungkin Pak Beni duluan kali ya Pak.
Okay, thank you, Pak Rengga. I think it should be like that. I mean, when we are trying to introduce new things, then it means that we need to also understand the potential impact of those new initiatives. With the I would say just transition, I think is part of the way we trying to be more understand on all of the aspect of the climate action. But I also has a thought. It's not only will this just transition will impede the climate action, but it should be also think the other way around. So we need to make sure that this initiative, I think explained by all of the panelists, that we should work together, and to be able to work together, we need a support from the policies, the regulation. We need the support from all of the stakeholders on doing this initiative, and I think there will be a time for us to, I would say, sacrifice something, but in the long run, I think we will have a benefit for all the aspect, not only from the climate change aspect, but also how to improve the welfare of the communities, the interest of the shareholders, and for us, in my idea, the most fundamental for us is actually how to make sure that we can continue able to deliver the values for all the stakeholders at the same time when we are doing the transition.
Yeah, I think from my side, I think I agree 100% Benny, right? So because for private sector like Adaro, number one, we see this, we need to adapt continuously, right? As a company, we cannot just sit around, be satisfied our, for example, coal benefits, right? But we need to adapt. And we see this as actually as an opportunity, not really a challenge, but we see this as an opportunity. And as a proud Indonesia company, our shareholders is always wants to contribute to society in general as well as Indonesia. So as I mentioned in my slides, we've taken several steps, right? For example, we're creating two new engines from the three pillars. We are actually transforming our businesses. So this is unheard of for Adaro. I think in the last 20 years, this is, I think, the first time we did our big transformation on our businesses, right? Number two, we are actually putting capital into potential RE businesses. So although coal price now, well, previously is very high, now it's down a little bit. We are not sitting around just enjoying the benefit of it, but we're actually putting capital from our coal businesses into the renewable energy sector as well as minerals required for the green economy. And our shareholder has been doing a pretty good job of directing us to do that, right? The third point is actually involving communities, because where we are operating is usually remote areas. So we try to get involved community as much as possible, especially on decarbonization efforts. Right, like I showed in my slide, we use communities to create pellets for co-firing power plants, and there are a lot of things that we do with the communities related to just energy transition. And I think the fourth point, I think one of the most important part here, because we must admit that Indonesia doesn't have the required skill sets yet for energy transition, because all of those are new, right? Hydrogen is very new. We just learning about that. Even solar PV businesses, battery businesses, it's very new. And for companies like Adaro who are developer, we always rely on international consultants to help us on that. For example, ERM, right? But I think we need to have those skill sets locally here, because Indonesia have abundance of resources, good engineers, good experts here that we need to build. So that's what we are actually building now. Although Adaro is building on the smaller scale, because we need to have internal experts on this. But I think the communities, the associations, the governments need to see that as a challenge to grow the skill set. Because without skill set, we won't be grow exponentially, and we will be left behind in our own backyard. So I think that's what I think is important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Pak Rengga and Pak Beni. There is a kind of follow-up question from Deas Pratama, which I think Pak Beni already answered. But I think it's good also to discuss here today live, Pak, about what will be the strategy, Pak, to absorb these active manpowers that potentially to another type of job in renewable energy. What will be your strategy and approach?
Well, I think this is something that we need to take care carefully, because in the end of the day, the expectation from the communities, from the stakeholders, is to maintain the roles of the companies to the stakeholders should be at the same level or even increase. So what we are doing in Mind ID is actually, when we think about the initiative such as decarbonization, we trying to make sure that those initiatives should be benefit not only on the climate perspective, but also how to create more value, how to also involve the local companies, the local communities on providing the support on where that initiative is in place. As part of our long-term planning is actually on the sustainability initiative. We focus to develop more circularity on all of the business value chain that we have. So we also focus on how to make sure the waste of our process, the waste of our product is actually can be remelting again, can be used for another product, and to ensure that we can put more values on and lives of that product. So with this approach, develop a new business in remelting initiative, we can actually add more capacity for us, but at the same time we can create more job for sure, to make sure that we can adopt the local communities, the local manpower around our operation. We need to update, we need to upgrade their skill, their knowledge, to ensure that they can capable to run the operation that we develop on that scheme. So we have a lot of initiative on this. We just launched a new remelting manufacturing industry in North Sumatra, to make sure that the waste from the aluminum can be generate another product. We plan to develop a lot of initiative to use our slag, our red mud, or our tailing to be able on the industrial scale to make sure that those initiatives not only benefiting in the portfolio, but also how to ensure it will improve the communities that are capable to involve on these projects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Benny. Pak Rengga, would you like to add a little bit from Adaro's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, Pak Benny already said it very well. Nothing to add on that one. But yeah, I mean, everyone wants to contribute on this one, right? And I think this is an exciting era for all of us. And if we are late to the game, as we say in a business community, then we will be left behind. So we must take this as an opportunity, not as a challenge. I think that's the key message here. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Another question, Bapak Ibu panelists, and I would like to ask these questions to all of you. This is from Zulfikar Fatoni. Thank you very much, Zulfikar. Deploying renewable energy at a relatively large capacity in Indonesia has largely been limited due to unsupportive policy and regulatory landscape. Thank you for being so honest. While there are incremental improvements across the years, it seems that to accelerate ETM, there needs to be a much greater push to ensure that there is this infrastructural support from the regulations. What would be the best practice then? What would be the best action to take from entities like MindID, Adaro, and ADB and other stakeholders, for example, to help pushing this? And the question is for all of you, and you can also answer, like, for example, not only on behalf, like, for example, Barani can also answer, what do you think private sector could do, Bu Rani, to support ETM, for example, as well as Rutusha. What do you think private sector could do, and what do you think institutions like ADB could do? So this is an open question. What actions can stakeholders take?
Yeah, maybe I'll try to answer that first. Of course, yeah, this is actually one potential challenge for the ETM is the complex regulatory environment, which is unique to each country also. And Indonesia, have a uniquely complex, given the magnitude and also the structure of the government. So and I think this is tied not just to the question of Pak Zulfikar Fatoni, but a lot of the question in the list here pertains to regulatory environment, like the subsidized fuel. That's very much unique to Indonesia because of the constitutional requirement of ensuring energy availability in an equitable manner, right? Which on the flip side, it creates a challenge for participation of the public sector. So I guess then what ADB does so far is supporting the government of Indonesia, broader programs with suites of tools that we have, including the policy-based support. Those are the support we're giving the government of Indonesia, including its technical assistant element, in order for the government to establish policies and regulations that may foster a more conducive environment for private sector participation. So on the other side of the question, what can private sector support in the energy transition mechanism? Well, ADB has been actively engaging key stakeholders to develop the ETM proposition and identify sources of concessional and private capital to undertake the ETM transaction at scale. We are working with the stakeholder to create enabling environment and to incentivize transaction through catalytic financing. We would like to crowd in more investment. However, also the high interest rate environment provides a little bit more challenge for us, more limited wiggle room for the concessional support that we would like to seek on that. Yeah, but we do invite private sector to participate more in energy transition mechanism, especially if it's IPP driven. Will be there are avenues for you to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Farengga, Pak Beni Rutuja.
Perhaps I will add a little bit if I may, Narita. So thank you for Ibu Rani for bringing this up, because this is a very complicated and actually sensitive topics, right? From the private sector's perspective, actually what we want is, we don't mind about the regulation, how complex it is. We try to make it work, but it's more on the clarity and continuity of the regulations. Sometimes the regulations doesn't really continue in the direction that we thought it would be. So we would like some clarity and continuity of those regulations. For example, we've been talking a lot about ceiling tariff, feed-in tariff, all kind of tariffs mechanism, right, to support renewable energy. But we think renewable energy still have some challenges on the tariff, because I mentioned earlier, although the costs around the world actually dropping, to build renewable energy in Indonesia is still expensive. That's a fact, right? Because, for example, just giving you example, might not be applicable to all, but still example, building solar PV in Middle Eastern country where the land is desert, nobody uses the land, it's very cheap compared to Indonesia. If you want to build solar PV in the land that is usable, people actually can do some farming in there. So it's one example why it's challenging. Although additionally, we have a regulation not connected to each other. For example, we want to grow renewable energy businesses like solar PV, but the local content requirement sometimes hinders that, because we have to admit that solar PV manufacturing is not so advanced in Indonesia right now, right? We are left behind in terms of technology. For example, in other part of the world now, they only use N-type for a panel, but in Indonesia right now, we still use P-type, and it's actually more expensive, right? And we do not have the right ecosystem or supply chain for the entire PV manufacturing. I don't want to go deep discussing that, but that's one of the challenges. The other challenge, in my opinion, is actually bankable PPAs, because as a private companies, IPP developer, we are doing project using project financing scheme. So we are actually rely on our lenders to help us on that, including ADB as one of our multilateral relationship lenders to help us on that. However, sometimes the PPA is not really bankable. So we need to have a clear communication, perhaps not only between our private sector and the lenders, but also between PLN, ESDM, with the lenders as well, to get a bridge between what PLN wants, what ESDM wants, what IPP wants, and what the lender can afford to give. So we want to be lender-centric sometimes, but sometimes in Indonesia, the draft PPA is not really bankable. So we need to work that out to find the right solution. I think that's a point from my side. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Farengga. So thank you very much, speakers. We could spend so much more time on this, but unfortunately, also looking at the clock, 4:30 on Friday, which actually amazing to see that a lot of attendees are still here with us. At 4:30 on Friday, right? But it means that we have this what has been presented are very insightful and very engaging for the participants. I would like to close out the session, but before that, let's see what are the key takeaways of today's discussions. Yes. So first of all, just transition. It's not new, although it's now gaining momentum as perspective to consider when you are working on your net zero plans. And then secondly, incorporating just transition as part of your process to enable a fair and equitable outcome. That's very important. And third, equip your organization to anticipate, analyze, and address just transition factors using existing guidance. Also, today we hear from the panelists and from the speakers that we would like to change the mindset of just transition a little bit. So it's not either or, it's not zero-sum game, but rather the concept is to make sure that the transitioning towards green energy, towards low carbon economy, shouldn't leave anyone behind or shouldn't leave any stakeholders behind. With that, I would like to thank you very, very much for, first of all, the speakers and also the support team who has been coordinating this webinar and allowing us to have this webinar today. And for the participants, if you still have any question, feel free to contact us. We will then direct your questions to the speaker and or we will reach out to you. The recording will be also sent to you along with the slide that we are presenting here. Thank you very much, Bapak Ibu, and thank you very much, our participants. We wish you a good
Thank you all.
evening and
Thank
good weekend.
you.
Bye-bye.